everyone. My name is Yatika Sivani Muthakrishnan, and I'm one of the founders and CEO of The Brain Camaraderie, a youth-led nonprofit advocating for those impacted by rare neurological disorders.
I'm Christine. I'm joining today as this nonprofit's communications lead. I help manage our outreach and storytelling platforms, and I'm super excited to be co hosting today's episode. Today, we are honored to be joined by a truly inspiring guest, Lauren McDermott. Lauren is an advocate, speaker, and a rare disease warrior living with stiff person syndrome, a condition so rare it affects 1 in a 2 million people globally. She worked for 16 years in real estate before receiving a working diagnosis of SPS in 2019, after nearly a decade of unexplained symptoms. Since then, she's become a lone wolf advocate, raising awareness about SPF, disability rights, and the urgent need for public healthcare reform. She's also been leading fundraising efforts for research by Dr. Marinos Dalakas, one of the top researchers in SPS. In this season, we're spotlighting the deeply personal stories behind rare neurological diseases like SPS, how patients like Lauren navigate life, advocacy, and healthcare systems that often overlook them.
I was actually thinking instead of an formal intro, maybe do two truths and a lie, and you try to guess the lie. A little
That sounds,
cheesy, but
that sounds like an amazing way to start the podcast off.
all right. So, first one is I am afraid of needles. Second one is I won a hot dog eating contest. And third one is I won best dancer in high school. Which do you think is the lie?
I'm gonna go ahead and say the second option. What about you, Chris?
I want to say the afraid of needles one. I think that's the lie.
So the lie is the hot dog eating contest. So
Yes.
bonus points for you. But yeah, I threw in the needles because to me it's kind of interesting because I have been extremely terrified of needles for most of my life and continue to be. It used to be a very extreme fear where I would have sweaty palms, shaking hands, basically almost going into a panic attack, and have to bring my mom even when I was going for vaccinations for college. And now, here I am with this rare disease and have a port in my chest that I get treatment with a big needle that sits in there for 3 days in a row every month till who knows when because there's no end date for this treatment. And also have had blood taken out of me. I can't even count how many times and been in hospitals. And so, for someone who's afraid of needles, I've had to conquer a lot aside from that, but also have to deal with needles all the time. So it's kind of funny, and then as far as being the best dancer, it's not something that I can really do maybe on a good day. I can kind of get some moves in and a little bit here and there, but it's not what it used to be. So just kind of take it as it comes.
Thank you. Lauren, your journey is very powerful, and stiff person syndrome is such a rare and often misunderstood condition, and most of our audience may not have even heard of it before. Could you walk us through your diagnosis journey? When did you first notice signs that something was off, and what led to your eventual diagnosis?
So, now it's like hindsight's 2020, right? So there's a lot of stuff that I can look back and realize were a little off and a little strange. That at the time you just kind of write off to not being a big deal and you can't piece everything together. But even going back to being young and shopping in the mall with my girlfriends, I remember my lower back would always hurt, and it was kind of strange to me because I was always in really good shape and always into fitness. I didn't play sports. I lifted weights and worked out on my own religiously since 8th grade and practiced yoga and flexibility, sauna, massages, everything. And it kind of explains because with SPS you get hyperlordosis, which is extra curvature of the back, which I absolutely have. It can also be called a sway back. So interestingly enough, I didn't know at the time that that's probably what was causing all the pain on my back, like doing certain tasks. And also when I was doing dishes, I would notice that too. And then it was about probably 8 years prior to diagnosis, I started getting all kinds of really hard muscle knots that almost felt like frozen pieces of edamame or chickpeas all along the scapula and shoulders, and I would get massages monthly. And I did that for about 5 years. And I just assumed, I'm a side sleeper. I sit at a desk all day. I'm getting older. I've worked out my whole life. This is just part of what I got to do to take care of my body. And I'm under a lot of stress. I had a pretty high stress job, worked long hours. So I just kind of thought this was just aging, normal stuff, till massages stopped working and I was going every 2 weeks and that wasn't doing anything. And then it got to a point where I was crying in massages because they were so unbelievably painful. And even she was saying it just feels so weird, the kind of knots and these weird masses that form around like the tendon areas, and you can feel them moving. You can literally feel them moving throughout like your body and get smaller. Sometimes it's even felt like odd cheese curl puffs are inside of me. I know that sounds completely wild, but it's the truth. So people have felt all these strange things and didn't know what they were. And at the time I was with somebody who was a personal trainer, and he said, this is not normal. I've trained a lot of people and no one has ever presented like this. I don't know what's going on with you. And I noticed my posture was becoming more rounded. It was becoming more challenging for me to work out. One day I'd be fine, do a hardcore workout of boot camp style with ropes and weights, knock it out of the park. And then the next day I would be crying, riding the Airdyne bike, barely able to do a bicep curl, joints starting to hurt, just random weird things. One day I did a pull-up, an assisted pull-up with a band around my leg, and the left side of my neck popped out and was palpitating. And got down, looked at it in the mirror, had somebody come next to me and said, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Because I don't know if this is really happening." And I was literally just watching my neck just move uncontrollably. And weirdly enough, it didn't hurt, but it was very strange. So then like waves of nausea without the ability to move my neck. And I didn't realize at the time that was technically a neck and upper back spasm. I didn't have a word to put to it. I just was like, I'm shut down. I can't move. I can't drive. I can't go anywhere. I can't go to work. And just such terrible pain. So it was probably about late 2018 that I said, starting next year in 2019, I'm going to find some doctors and I'm going to start looking into this. And went to a sports medicine doctor who tested me for everything under the sun because she just started seeing that this was more of a systemic issue than just the upper back, because then the knees started to hurt. Some slurred speech was going on, so she started to think this has got to be a full body thing, and she was going to go with the diagnosis of fibromyalgia. I tried cryotherapy, different types of massage therapy, trigger point, all kinds of stuff, heat exposure, sleep apnea test, all kinds of blood work, chiropractor, anything, acupuncture, anything and everything I could think of and that she could think of, incorporating different exercises on days I could do them. And I just kept getting worse. Lidocaine injections, dry needling. The last stitch was Botox injections, which about 4 or 5 days after receiving those, completely downhill. Back spasm hit me. I happened to have a good day. The beginning of the day was in the Catskills hiking, and out of nowhere, had to drop the book bag, said I got to get out of the woods. I was afraid they were going to have to carry me out of the woods, the people I was with, because it was just such intense pain and stiffness, and I could not move anything from, about the rib cage area up. It was completely locked up. So getting out of the woods was pretty hard. But that's when I realized Botox was not going to be the glorious answer that she thought it was going to be. And I said to myself, this is not fibromyalgia, and I need to start going to see some other doctors, because I really feel at this point there's something seriously wrong with me, and I'm terrified and I have no idea what it is. And then that's when I landed at Penn and got the diagnosis because about 2 weeks prior to that appointment, a coworker had listened to what was going on with me and kindly had done some of his own research and stumbled upon stiff person syndrome, sent it to me. So I was prepared with that diagnosis to ask about when I went for the appointment. And when I read about it, it was both terrifying but also kind of validating, because I thought, this is what I have. But at the same time, you're reading about it and you're watching videos on it, and there's a lot of horrible stuff out there on the internet about stiff person syndrome. So it was extremely scary. And then I came up a negative for the GAD antibody test, which is usually what they do to further complicate things, to further confuse everyone. And after ruling everything else out and doing a few more scans and some more blood work, it just, they were like, there's nothing else we can find. And from all the criteria the doctor had studied up, because of course he had never had a patient with it, he felt that the diagnosis fit. And at that point, I could not work anymore. I could basically just lay on a heating pad, crying all day. Very minimal movement. Being in a car made me nauseous, so even going to the doctor's appointments would put me into a spasm. But they diagnosed me, and then second opinion was officially Dr. Marino Stalakis at Jefferson. But I'm lucky in the sense that although I had all these symptoms for quite some time, they weren't major for a long time, and I was able to manage and still live life and still work full time and socialize and work out. Whereas most people, it's 5 to 7 years of grueling pain. I got really lucky that I got into a doctor after that 6 months of trying to figure out stuff with the other doctor. And then he was able to filter me through these other very good doctors. When you see the head of rheumatology at Penn Medicine in Philadelphia, and he says to you, I've never had a patient with stiff person, and I think you have it, and he looks kind of stumped. You get very scared because it's the head of rheumatology. And when they tell you, we don't know how to treat you, other than the oral medication, you need a second opinion because we don't even know what to do with you, is even scarier. So I'm lucky that the extremely painful portion was fairly short-lived compared to most people, and for that I'm grateful, because I know people go through really, really long, rough times.
And that experience must have been like so long, uncertain, and filled with so much doubt. And what would you say about misdiagnosis? Like the person first, the sports doctor, they misdiagnosed you, and then you had to spend so much time and so much effort and so many other resources on things that didn't work. What would you have to say about that experience as a whole?
I think it's extremely common when it comes to rare disease. Doctors unfortunately are looking for all the common things, which I understand. You do have to rule that out, but I think they have to have an open mind of knowing that most patients know their body pretty well. And I've dealt with some other kind of semi-autoimmune related or just other chronic issues that may or may not be related to SPS, because there's only so much that we know. So I've had to advocate for myself in those areas, and there's always, everything I seem to get seems to be a mystery. I'm just like, I just like to confuse doctors. This is what I was born to do, I guess. But yeah, I'm not alone with that. There's a lot of people get diagnosed with MS or Parkinson's, or a dual diagnosis, and then find out later maybe it's one or the other, or maybe it is both. I do know some people that have MS and SPS. Some have Parkinson's and SPS, and they've been through those journeys for a while, so it seems like they have both. So it's pretty wild how you can get one autoimmune disease, and then especially with SPS, and it's just a cascading effect of a bunch of others. At this point in time, I'm lucky that I don't have another one. I do have some antibody markers for thyroid disease, so in the future I might end up with that, and that's something we have to keep an eye on. But for right now, the hormone levels are fine, but I have the markers. So doctors like things tied up with a bow of, you have to have the antibody, you have to fit all this criteria. But with something so rare, And when you're presenting in such a complex way, doctors really need to try to think outside of the box and listen to the patient. I do recall when I went in for the appointment and said that I think I have SPS, I originally went in for an emergency appointment with a doctor the day before the main doctor at Penn got me into where I needed to be. And she laughed at me when I said, I think I have stiff person syndrome and I want you to test me for it. And she said that I would most likely be on a respirator. And I said, that is not what I've read. And as they were pulling blood out of me to, collect samples to run a bunch of tests, she came in. I don't know if she spoke with someone on the phone, had a change of heart, or what happened. And she said, can we test her for the GAD antibody? Do we have, because I think it has to be collected in a certain way, sent in a certain way, so forth. And as they're pulling blood, they said, yeah, another nurse is checking. And she said, yes, we can. So, but then funny enough, I come up negative. So, but it just, thank God for that employee that told me, because I had been doing so much research on my own. There's so many conditions that involve muscle spasms. You could search literally till the end of time. And I just happened not to stumble upon this. I was still trying to work and in a relationship, taking care of my dog, living a normal life, trying to still do things and get by. So, and trying all these different avenues of things to help me make me feel better. So I only had so much time to dedicate to research. But, it's hard talking back to a doctor. It's hard getting firm, and you feel like you're telling them how to do their job. You feel like you're overstepping your bounds. What if I piss this doctor off and they don't want to see me? Is that a possibility? Or to be labeled as crazy, in quotes, or dramatic. But again, I think for me, because I was in such bad shape so quickly, there was no denying how bad I was. But I know that a lot of people don't have that luxury and maybe aren't looking as severe as I was looking at the time, and wouldn't have been believed, because one day you can do one thing, the next day you can't do it and you're a completely different person. So it's an extremely fickle, insidious, weird disease to catch. But yeah, I would say advocacy, doing your own research, coming forth with questions no matter how stupid or ridiculous they may seem. Because even asking my support group, I remember feeling at times that a spider's crawling on my head, and it's something I still get to this day that I never had before. And I don't know if it's muscles in the scalp or different things that maybe are moving, because we do get muscle twitches a lot. And I asked if anybody else had that symptom, feeling like they were going to probably all laugh at me. And, 3 or 4 women were like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm always asking my husband if I have a bug on my head or something like that. And I'm like, really? This is pretty interesting. So you never know, what's going to happen or who else shares your experience. So I think you just have to put it out there and not be afraid. And it's hard to do, but it's the only way you're going to get answers and find common ground with people.
Thank you for sharing that. And I completely understand that isolation can be as painful as the physical symptoms, especially with conditions as rare as SBS. What would you say has been the hardest part of your experience, the symptoms themselves or the lack of awareness around SBS?
Both. So the symptoms are terrible. Wouldn't wish it, worst enemy, it literally just feels at times that parts of your body are being crushed by heavy machinery, or ripping apart. It kind of doesn't almost feel real because of how bizarre it feels. With the way the muscles work, the agonist and the antagonist. So the other day I'm having a chest spasm, but it's also the back spasming. So it's both muscles, and it just feels as though there's a vice just literally trying to smash your body in two. And it's hard to breathe. You want to try to cry, but crying can further induce it. So it's like, how do you get relief? So you sit on a heating pad, and you ride out the storm. Sometimes, if it's warrants, you take extra medicine, but you have to be careful with that because we're on some strong medicine and you don't want your tolerance to be raised. So you have to decide and pick and choose what are the best times to do that. But the symptoms have taken away a lot in my life, and I used to be extremely active and hike, golf, ski. I owned a mountain house in the Catskills, and the purpose was to do all those fun activities. Camp, I was going to actually had just purchased a bunch of backpacking stuff because I was thinking that, this was going to resolve itself and I was going to figure this out and I'm going to retire at my mountain house and still do all these fun things. Used to love going to loud concerts and dancing and, all that's gone. I can't do any of that. And that's very sad. And the awareness is hard too because, sometimes, like I said, people see you one day. Most days you appear normal, right? Normal in quotes, meaning it doesn't look like there's physically anything wrong going on with your body. And that's what's the hardest part, is making people aware of invisible, non-apparent, whatever term you want to use. In my case, it is a disability because I do not work and I'm on long-term disability. And that is really challenging because people will judge you. For example, when I had to go vote in the most recent presidential election in town in New Jersey, I, for some reason, did not get my mail-in ballot. I tried to apply. It didn't come. I had to go and stand in line. But I saw that there was a separate disabled line. So I read online that there should be a separate line for that. So I decided to walk up there. I just saw several elderly people, some with walkers, some with canes, go right in and be let in by someone. It didn't appear they just got dropped off because I saw them when I came into the parking lot. And I'm there with my cane because I don't really know what to expect. And I take my cane sometimes preventative. Sometimes I actually need it, like before I even walk out the door, but I don't know. A situation might arise, so I always have a cane around in case I need it. And I was treated very poorly, to be honest with you. They kind of just looked me up and down, and I said, hey, what's going on? I see this is a disabled line. The line is all the way wrapped around the building. Now it's even more people have come in. They said, we'll be right back. They had to check on something for my ward. They come back. She says, where were you in line? And I said, what do you mean, where was I in line? This is a separate line. I came up to here. And she thought I had gotten into line and picked the person out in front of me and then came up to this disabled line. So then they want me to come inside and sit for what was going to end up being probably 2 hours till that person came up into line, and then I would get in front of that person and then vote. So either I have to stand in line for 2 hours or sit down for 2 hours and wait for that person to come. And I said, this doesn't make any sense to me. I said, I just saw some elderly people get let in, and I can tell they're already voting. I can see them. Why am I being treated differently? There was no one else in the disabled line, just me alone. And other people are hearing this conversation. People in line, 2 women, separately, who didn't know each other, said, she can get in front of me. The other woman, she can get in front of me. They said, we can't believe that they're telling her that she had to be in line. Someone else walks out, tells me I have to go back in line. Again, he's telling the same thing. And I said, sir, I am not walking back in that line. I've already been standing out here for 15 minutes. The line has already gotten longer. I don't understand why I have to get in line. And they were kind of quietly whispering to me, other people have issues too, And I'm like, what is that supposed to mean? Because I'm not in a wheelchair, or I don't look a certain way, that I'm being treated differently than the elderly people now? Even though I also did have a cane. And I said, I have a disability proof placard if you need to see that. Is there an issue with you not believing that I'm disabled? So at this point I'm getting a little loud because I'm getting frustrated, and that's when the people were chiming in, and she's trying to quiet me down, and they're telling me, oh, the ADA says we can't treat people differently. I said, I don't, I'm not a lawyer, not a legal expert. I don't think the ADA wants you to tell me to go back into the long line and wait, or to sit here for 2 hours when my body can't do either. So it's about accommodating people. And if this is your idea of accommodation, there's a serious problem here. So I did write a very lengthy letter. Did I ever hear back? No. But that's just a tiny example of here I am going to vote, which is my right, and already a little worked up about the process going there because I didn't get my mail in ballot. And because I look young enough and fit enough, and I guess not disabled enough, I was treated completely differently than three or four elderly people that went in right before me. And to me, that's kind of what the struggle is with this, and it was a perfect example as to how we can be treated sometimes.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that experience. It's actually an eye opener. Like just because you look fine, that they treat you different. They honestly don't realize what you're going through. And is this what made you turn to advocacy? Is this what was your turning point? What was that one thing that tipped you off the edge and you were like, yeah, I need to raise awareness. I'm stepping out. I'm getting myself into this game. I'm raising awareness for SPS.
LinkedIn was really, believe it or not, it's something that I always had a profile on for work because I had to, but I never used it. And then I'm not on social media as far as Facebook and Instagram. I have a little bit on Instagram now for some news because it seems like that's the only way to get actual real news nowadays. But and I hate that I have to be on that for that reason. But anyway, with LinkedIn, I started learning a lot about advocacy and seeing other people's posts and them not being afraid to talk about their different journeys through medical issues and disability advocates and learning language. I mean, just for example, I didn't even realize that in the UK they haven't used the word handicap for quite some time, and that the US is kind of really behind on that. It seems like we've phased that out because now it's not really called a handicap placard. I believe they call it accessible parking or something like that when I got the renewal for it. So the terminology is slowly changing, but it seems to be, disability is the way to go, accessible parking, not saying handicap spot, not saying a handicapped person. And everyone can identify however they feel. But, that's just something small. But I just started learning all these different things, and I never even knew what the word ableist or ableism meant, right? And which is discrimination against disabled people. And learning that I had my own internalized ableism and still do, and I still battle with that, beating myself up for when I can't do things, or feeling like I'm less than, or I'm a burden, or what's the point, and I needed a place to put all that pain and frustration and feeling like I can't control my body. It's hard to control my mind because the pain and the medication and everything have kind of changed the way everything works upstairs. And how do I make sense of any of this, and where do I put all this? So I kind of just started throwing up posts on LinkedIn to see what would happen, and I met a lot of people, and I got some people into Dr. Delacus. Some received diagnoses of SPS, some haven't. But eliminating a diagnosis is also good. And then asked him, what can we do? Can we create a support group? I see, pamphlets when I'm at your appointment at Jefferson in Philadelphia. I see yoga for Parkinson's. Well, where's yoga for SPS? What can be done? And I didn't really get a whole lot as far as that was concerned. I am raising funds for him for his current studies, which is also hard. It's people donate once or twice and then it kind of fizzles out, and I understand it. And I try to remind people every year around Rare Disease Day, every little bit counts, even if it's $25. But it felt good just to put things down. It almost is kind of like journaling on LinkedIn, and then to connect with others who I could help. I felt like even if I just got one person the diagnosis, right, and they're suffering and they feel alone, I mean, I would talk to people just on LinkedIn from a simple email, then we end up in a 3 hour phone conversation about everything in life, including whatever medical issues we're going through. And they're my friends now, and it's mostly what we talk about are medical things, but that's, every friendship is useful for different things. And I think it's given me a purpose, a reason to keep going. And I know that not everyone is good at being their own advocate. Some people are more timid. Some people get very nervous, and I'm not saying that I don't get nervous, and I do have anxiety around that whole process. But if any little bit that I can do can help someone else speak a little bit louder for themselves and get what they need, then that feels like a win for me, and it gives me a reason to get up in the morning.
Thank you. And you've been active on LinkedIn and joining podcasts and building connections with people like Dr. D. And what kind of responses do you receive from the rare disease community and the medical community?
So I wouldn't say too much from the medical community. There is one of the doctors that's ahead of the Celine Dion Foundation, Dr. Amanda Piquet, um, at it's the University of Colorado. She is very active on LinkedIn and on social media, and I really appreciate that. And she's like some of my posts. And I actually was asked by someone who recently, with all the administration changes happening in our political landscape, someone reached out to me and said, could I get in touch with Celine Dion to see they were looking for a rare disease celebrity patient to speak in front of Congress, I believe. And I reached out to Dr. Amanda Piquet because I know she's head of the foundation, not as the fact that she treats Celine, because I know that would be a HIPAA violation, but more of, hey, can you maybe throw this in front of her and see if she would be open to doing this? And I understand she said she can't do that, but just even having that avenue to try to do that, right? So I'm also friendly with the CEO and creator of the Stiff Person Syndrome Research Foundation. Sorry, sometimes I stumble over my words. The SPSRF, based out of Bethesda, Maryland. And Dr. Piquet is on that board, as well as Dr. Delakis, who I see, and I pushed for him to get on that, and there's a bunch of other doctors that have joined. So it's just good in that sense of, them updating the website. They're going to update the diagnostic criteria. I think Dr. Delakis specifically is the one that's going to work on that, because he did the original criteria, and some of it's obviously changed with different antibodies and different studies that have come up and information he's come to light now. So, yeah, that's been kind of interesting, interacting as much as I can that way. But as far as just the rare disease community in general on LinkedIn, extremely supportive, never anything negative. I mean, everyone just shows love for each other and extreme compassion and empathy. And that's the one big thing that I think has changed for me, is that not that I wasn't an empathetic person at all, but I think it helped me tap into having more compassion as a person, just in general. And, when you're walking around in your day and doing whatever it is you're doing, whether it's walking past someone on the sidewalk or you're at the grocery store, whatever it is, you have no idea what's happening in someone's day and how they're feeling, whether it's a mental health issue, whether it's a physical disability, pain, heartbreak. Everyone's in different headspaces, and to just try not to judge things that you see or ways people are going about doing something, because it might be an adaptation for them that they need. And I think receiving that love online allowed me to also give that love to others, and gave me some more confidence in that area, and more empathy. And for that, I'm very grateful, because I don't know if I would have gotten that without this experience, because it's extremely humbling.
Yeah, that must have been it must have been a growth journey, right? Like from from being like generally empathetic to actually realizing, like actually having lived the life out, that must have been such a huge growth journey. And one major part of your advocacy is raising funds for Dr. Delacus' research. Can you tell us more about what drew you to his work and what gives you hope with the current clinical trials that he's leading?
So, to my knowledge, I believe he's the longest studying doctor out there for SPS. He started at the NIH. I believe he did the first IVIG, which is intravenous immunoglobulin, which is what I receive through my port every month, which a lot of SPS patients get. That's kind of like the first line IV treatment that you would try before moving on to maybe like immunosuppressants. So he did the first trial for that for stiff person, and then I believe he did that with the CEO of the current infusion company that I use called Kaba Fusion, but he was with a different infusion company at the time. So I've even talked to him, which was very fascinating to talk to the CEO of the infusion company where I get all my meds, and that's basically allowed me to keep walking for as long as I can and given me a lot of quality of life back from where I was when I got diagnosed. Um, Dr. Delacus is extremely intelligent. He does not seem to want to give up on this, and he really wants to know what causes SPS, and I think he has an extreme passion for it, and I appreciate it. He also has a connection still with the University of Athens, and I believe he might have labs in Greece, maybe in Spain. So he has some international pool, and gets information exchange, and I think that's really fascinating because there could be so much more going on, over in Europe, maybe what we're not doing here, and they can kind of share information back and forth. So he seems to be privy to a lot of that. So he is running currently two trials. One is with Vyvgart, if I'm saying it correctly, and I think they're using that for myasthenia gravis. I always have a hard time saying that. And now they're trialing it for stiff person syndrome, and also CAR T cell therapy. And he's not the only one doing it. There's a couple of different places. I believe Amanda Piquet may be also doing some of that herself, and perhaps maybe the Mayo Clinic and maybe John Hopkins. But and then the money, some other money I raise, he just gives to fellows to go to conferences so they can be further educated, or maybe it just was supplement for salary for a physician's assistant. So again, I'd love to raise so much more. I know that he said to do, an actual study, I'd have to raise about $1 million, which that's not going to happen, I don't think. I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I'm trying to be realistic. But it's kind of wild how much money you would actually have to raise to really, fully make a difference. But look, I got to take the little wins where I can and do the little things that I can do that can help any little bit. So that's why I like trying to support his work.
All right, that's a very meaningful reason. Um, let's pivot to the current political government landscape and the healthcare policies, which are a core theme of today's episode. And in our earlier conversation, you mentioned concern about the recent healthcare policy shifts, like with Medicaid and Medicare. Could you share more about what changes or rollbacks that you're most worried about and how they could affect patients with rare diseases, especially SPS?
Um, it's very scary to me, and especially even just on LinkedIn. This is not fake news. These are disability organizations or rare disease organizations that are rolling out information, sending out letters. I think Nord might have put out a letter to kind of talk about different things that are going on. And I actually last week listened in on a panel from the Every Life Foundation for Rare Diseases, and they do a lot of good work, and they have something they call Rare Disease Legislative Advocates, and RDLA, and they run different webinars that you can listen in on, and this one was about the big beautiful bill, which I hate to say, but that's what I'll say, HR1 I believe it's called, that passed. And I wanted to understand, I'm not on Medicaid, I'm on Medicare, but I wanted to understand what the changes are for Medicaid, because one day I might be on it, and I know that this administration obviously only has so many years, but a lot of damage can be done in a few years, and to erase that damage, who knows how long this will take. As well as, there are a lot of people with rare disease on Medicaid, and I just kind of wanted to be educated for any of my peers that I talk to on a regular basis that this might affect. And to be honest, I understand it, but it's very confusing, like these guidelines of who's going to be kicked off Medicaid and who's not. Some odd things to me are caretakers of children under the age of 13 will still have coverage. And I'm thinking to myself, so you have a very disabling rare disease and you turn 14 and all of a sudden you don't need a caretaker anymore, and then that caretaker's not going to need Medicaid anymore. So all of a sudden, I guess at 14, everybody's cured and everybody's fine and doesn't need caretakers anymore. So that was kind of interesting. And another requirement is 80 hours of work per month, which doesn't sound like a lot, maybe, right? 20 hours a week. But I think about undiagnosed patients, right? Like, let's say you have a job, but you are trying to figure out. I go back to where I was trying to work and go to all these appointments, and I luckily I was on salary. I had a boss that was understanding, would let me go to appointments in the middle of the day, and then I'd come back and work late, or I could work from home and do certain things. Not everybody has that flexibility. And there's been a lot of rollback with work from home, as we know, which is just detrimental to the disability community, rare disease, because that opened the doorway for a lot of jobs. So now, especially I read that Amazon is requiring a lot of return, to work, which I know that's been kind of like a big uproar. So 80 hours of work a month might not be possible every month. And if someone has a flare, not everybody wants to be on disability. Not everybody qualifies for disability. Stiff person syndrome is unique in the sense that it's on the compassionate allowance list. I don't know if this is anything you ladies have ever heard of, but with Social Security, there's a list of so many conditions that are qualified for compassionate allowance, meaning when you apply for long-term disability, you quickly get approved because it's such a serious condition. I did consult with a lawyer that was very kind to give me a flat rate to kind of help me, but I applied through the whole process. Most people do get attorneys to help, but of course they're not cheap, so I was trying to do this on my own. And he was kind enough to offer his advice, and I got approved. I believe it was within 2 months, I heard, which I've heard a lot of stories of other people having to fight and appeal. And when you appeal, if it's still the same as it was before, you only get one appeal. So if they deny you and then you try to push back and you don't get it, then that's it for that condition. And it's extremely scary. So I was lucky to come down with a disease that has a compassionate allowance list, right? Because then I didn't have to spend attorney fees. But a lot of people do. And, this 80-hour work requirement might be really hard for some people that have chronic illnesses and things that go in episodes and flares. I'm also concerned about all the jobs that have been cut, some of the stuff around vaccines. I don't want to go down a vaccine rabbit hole, but what I'm afraid of is, I do get certain vaccines. Others I would be leery of as well because I do my own research also, and I'm sure they're not all safe. Some are. I think there's a lot of benefit to it, but I fear catching even a cold, because with stiff person syndrome, coughing can then induce an abdominal spasm, a throat spasm. If you get the stomach virus and you vomit, you could have abdominal spasms again, and which then could create back spasms and a whole trifecta of issues. So it's not good for any of us to be sick. And now I'm worried with less vaccinations. We see the measles case already rising, right? I'm just afraid of what's to come with all these experts gone, leniency on vaccines, loss of Medicaid, where people aren't going to be able to get the treatment they need, and caretakers aren't going to have, the benefits they need to take care of their loved ones. And I'm afraid that what's next? Is Medicare on the chopping block next, or is there going to be something different? For example, right now with Medicare, it's a lot better for whatever was put in place. I believe it was last year, because I think I got the email last year from Medicare that the cap on out-of-pocket prescription costs is $2,000. Well, that's amazing for someone like me who's on IVIG, because I will meet that during my first infusion, right out the gate. Now I can apply for financial hardship through my infusion company. Some do that, some don't. I think it depends on whether you've been a patient or not. Not everybody's aware of that, so I'd like to put that out there. But, worst case scenario, I'm paying $2,000 because in-home infusion and it's on my Part D of my Medicare. Now, what if, the administration decides to change that? Or what if they start trying to move towards privatizing Medicare? I'm already paying $500 a month for all my wraparound plans. That is a lot of money for someone who's on a fixed income. And as we all know, it's extremely hard to find an affordable apartment, an affordable house, and I need help taking care of things. And it just, all of it intertwined together is pretty much a hot mess. I don't know. And scary. And I'm only laughing because I don't know what else to do sometimes, but I do get these emails from NORD and from Foundation for Rare Diseases and other agencies, organizations that I follow, and they'll have a call to action where they'll have a pre-filled in form to contact your legislators, and you can add in a line or two. I don't know if you guys have ever seen anything like that. So that makes it really easy, and I try to do that all the time when anything ever comes across, whether it directly affects me or not. I just know that it affects disabled people or people in the rare disease community, and I want to help in any way I can. So while I might not be able to go protest, which I would have loved to have done for the No Kings protest, to be honest, I would have loved to have been out there, but it's not an environment I can put my body in. And I would love to be, on Capitol Hill doing something, protesting and giving my thoughts, and it would go on for hours probably, but again, it's the travel's not possible for me to there, and that would be a very stressful situation, and I'm not lined up to know enough people to do anything like that, nor do I feel like have enough expertise to do that at this point. So I'll do the little bit of things here and there I can do and try to educate people around me as to what's going on, and try to help out anybody that might be confused about it. If I have more information than they do, I'll share that.
Some people think of politics and health as totally separate topics. So, what would you say to someone who doesn't see how decisions made in the government impact the daily lives of people like you?
I think that comes from lack of knowledge, right? Consuming all this news gets me very upset. I'm just turned 44, and I've never in my entire adult life been this upset about politics and have like visceral emotional reactions to what's happening, because there is so much happening at once. It's almost even hard to keep track of, and the major news stations don't show everything that's happening, all these little tiny things that are kind of getting snuck in. For example, a lot of people probably wouldn't know this, but I found out from LinkedIn from a post from someone that the U.S. Department of Energy, which is not something you would typically think has anything to do with accessibility, eliminated accessibility requirements for the 17,000 federally funded buildings used by millions. And it was claimed to be non-controversial, in quotes, and it was issued as a direct final rule that bypasses the standard public notice and comment process. So I believe you're supposed to be able to comment, which means kind of speak up against this rule. For 60 days. They limited it, I believe, to 30 days, so they closed the window, and this was not reported anywhere. I read a lengthy article about it because I didn't really quite understand it, because I thought, isn't this a violation of the ADA? Like, this doesn't even make sense. How can they do this? And there's a suspicion that it might be with buildings that are going to power AI, but people still need to work in those buildings. So if they're not accessible, you're eliminating disabled people that might want to work in that field right off the bat. But then further down in the article, it also explains that it means if there's ever renovations on an existing federal building, that now the accessibility requirement is no longer there. which this is wild to me. And I had to read it a couple times because I'm like, is this really real on this day and age? And how many people fought for the ADA and all this accessibility, and it's just quietly drifting away. And I would have never known about that had I not seen the LinkedIn post. And I don't know of any other news places talking about it, but I've read several articles about it now. And I mean, that's really upsetting. It's terrible. I mean, these are federal buildings. They should be, everywhere should be accessible in my mind. And I know we're a long way away from that. There's still hope. It can still be possible. But federal buildings, at the very least, I mean, it's a joke. I just can't believe it's happening. So I just think that you have to listen to this icky stuff, and you have to inform yourself. You can, ignorance is sort of bliss to a degree, but when all of a sudden maybe you get a letter that you no longer have health coverage, ignorance is not bliss anymore, and it becomes a very serious consequence that you have to live with because of different political views and of not prioritizing marginalized communities. Because this administration, let's face it, we all know they could care less about marginalized communities, and if anything, they would love to just push us all away.
We've also seen a lot of discussions, especially with the current political landscape, about all the disability rights and all those things. And in the recent years, where exactly do you think the progress has stalled or even moved backwards? Do you think the initial enthusiasm with like all the ADA, all those protests, do you think we're reverting to our healthy people working only lifestyle, especially with like rare conditions and disabilities? Do you think progress has stalled, or do you think it's just in some aspects that this is happening?
I do feel like we're taking kind of steps backwards. Like I said, going back to the work, coming back to the office and this accessibility. There was something else that I saw too. It was Harvard Nurses Health. I think since 1976, they've been gathering data. It's 280,000 nurses in the US, and they investigate chronic illness factors for women, and they film a database. And it's led to many breakthroughs for markers for disease development. And as we all know, the administration has been attacking Harvard, which is now going to most likely affect the funds for something like that. So not only is it about not caring about disability, it's also not caring about women's rights. And yes, chronic health and, most rare disease is chronic. So, yeah, it's just a trickle down effect. And it's very sad because we have such a long way to go where we were already at, and then to see that we're kind of moving backwards as a nation. And I did see also too that there were some disabled people. It looked like, I think it was 25 or 30 to 30 people, again not on major news, but they were at some federal building, not exactly sure where because I don't want to say any misinformation, and they were protesting before the bill got passed in wheelchairs. When you see the pictures of these people, most non-threatening group, I don't think anybody's coming out swinging and, gonna really like take down an officer. And again, I know I'm judging off of appearance, but I'm just saying they didn't look like a very threatening bunch, and they were zip tied to their wheelchairs for just doing a peaceful protest. I mean, to see that in America is just disgusting to me. I just, the one person too I read in the article, I think they had medication on them in their wheelchair in like a compartment somewhere. How are you going to get to your medication now that you have to take when you're zip tied to your wheelchair? I mean, or if you have to go to the bathroom or anything. And I mean, they were peaceful. So, I mean, when you can't even peacefully protest, it's scary because then it's going to make a lot of other people afraid to speak up where maybe they get a chance. And yes, it might not be in front of Congress and whatever, but I feel like we should be allowed to speak our minds, because that's what this country is supposed to all be about, is freedom of speech. And they just want to shut a lot of us up, and it's not okay.
Are there any like programs or support groups that you're afraid might straight up just disappear or change with these policy shifts?
Um, I think for me, I guess what I get very scared about is that it's very hard to get funding for rare disease because each rare disease has such a small population. So we're already not top of mind. We're not the first to where research is going to go because money cannot be made off of us, right? Because there's only going to be so many people. Biotech companies aren't very interested because it's not a large population to make money off of. And when you have all this chaos going on and people that have been there for a long time that probably know the ins and outs and have dealt with some of these nonprofits and so forth, and that's what I worry about is some nonprofits and other foundations that do good work that maybe are going to lose their funding, that are going to roll back even more with awareness and disability advocacy. And I just feel like, where are we going to get the funding for rare disease? And I have to hold on to the hope for a cure because I have to have some sort of hope, right? And it would be lovely. I mean, I haven't thrown out my skis, I haven't thrown out my golf clubs, because I'm hoping that one day I'm going to whip them out again and go down the ski hill and hit some golf balls. But it's looking kind of grim with what's going on, and I just don't think that the money's going to be there right now. And that's why I'm really grateful that Celine Dion created her foundation with Dr. Piquet and did donate some money. I was kind of hoping to hear maybe some other people who are Celine Dion fans, or maybe some famous friends of hers, would have donated even more money. I haven't really heard of that. Maybe that's happening and I'm just not aware of it. I'm not sure, but there definitely was some momentum behind that, which that's a hopeful piece for me. But even Celine Dion having it, there's still a lot of doctors that don't know about it, and there's still a lot of people that just don't know about it, because sometimes I say, oh, I have what Celine Dion has, and people just look at me with like a blank face. Because if you're of a certain generation, it seems like you don't really know Celine Dion or listen to her music. So it seems like it's mostly older generations that have known her for ages and also watch Good Morning America, because she was on there several times, and she was also on the Today Show. So if you're not part of the older generation consuming mainstream media, and or just are old enough to know Celine and be into her music, some people just aren't even aware of it. So I mean, not that you ever hope a celebrity gets this terrible condition, obviously. It was extremely hard to watch her message when she posted on Instagram, but at the same time, part of you thinks about, wow, think about all the awareness this is create and the funds that are going to come in, and we're going to get a cure. And it felt like, she announced in 2022, so we're starting to get some momentum here, and it's more people slowly are starting to know about it. And now it's, now you have all these policies coming into play. So it does feel like kind of at sort of maybe like a standstill, if you will, and if anything, maybe going backwards. And that's scary, it's making the hope less, and I don't need any of that, because I need to hold on to something.
And for people like us and people who are going to be listening to this podcast who are young, like students and people like that, who like want to be better allies, what can we do to make a meaningful difference?
I think what you ladies are doing is amazing, and I thank you for your work. You're so young, and to have these interests, is fantastic. And I think the younger generations are actually inspirational to me, because there's a lot more acceptance there. There's a lot more fluidity. I think just overall, a little bit more kindness. acknowledgement of mental health and as well, and open to talking about that. Whereas older generations, we've had to try to slowly undo some of this stuff, that it's okay to talk about your feelings. It's okay to be angry. Angry can be a tool for action. It's just got to be put into the right idea, whatever it is you want to do, right mode of action. So I think the younger generation, I think they do a fabulous job, to be honest. I don't really have much advice for them. It would be the older generation that I would probably say, please try to have a little more compassion and a little more awareness around this stuff. But I think overall, just one thing that is so humbling about having a disease like this, where you have no idea how you're going to be when you wake up, and you can be one way 1 hour and literally an hour later just be a completely, almost like a dead man walking, is that don't take anything for granted in life. Driving is a privilege, walking is a privilege, kindness is for free, and compassion is free. And just try to not judge as best as you can, even though we all do at times. We're human, right? And we're all going to make mistakes. And that ask what someone needs, don't assume, lead with an open heart, and treat people the way you want to be treated. It's as simple as the golden rule, and that's the way I've always tried to live my life. Is how would I want someone else to approach me? I've learned the things of, you don't touch someone's wheelchair, you don't touch their cane. If someone drops a cane, you don't pick it up. You ask, do you want me to pick that up? Because that's an extension of their body. And I've learned this through my own issues, and I've also learned by seeing other people's stories. The wheelchair they think of as an extension of their body as well. That's their legs, if you will. And a lot of people mean well when they do these kind of things, and it's okay that they do them, and then we can just educate them. But just to be open to hearing a disabled person's experience, because my experience is completely different than the next disabled person, even if they have SPS, because also SPS is a spectrum disorder. So my symptoms in my day are totally different than the next person with SPS. And we're all unique individuals, and we need to be treated and respected as such. I know it's always easier said than done, but it's something that I'm trying to learn to do every day. I'm not saying it's going to be easy or that it has been, but I think that the younger generation is doing a pretty darn good job of it.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It was a whole journey to listen to you talk, like, about your personal experiences, the misdiagnosis, the raising funds, the advocacy journey, and your personal growth, and your words about kindness is free and compassion is free, and about the tools they use to it's an extension of themselves. That's the first time I actually thought of it that way, about canes and wheelchairs being an extension. I just thought they were just assistants. But thank you for putting it that way when you phrased it as an extension of themselves. That hit home. And thank you so much for being here with us today. And your voice was just so powerful, and I love that you were so honest with us. And if there was anything that you could say to your younger self when you first got diagnosed with SPS, what would it be?
Oh, I should have partied harder. There's a certain personality trait that kind of we notice that runs with people that have stiff person syndrome, and it's not shocking. It seems to be sort of like a type A kind of, for lack of a better terminology. I know that I have high functioning anxiety. I used to juggle a lot in life and supervise a couple individuals, and like I said, I have very high stress, a lot of hours working at my job, and it's like, you think just because you're working long hours and you're working hard, it's like a badge of honor, but actually it's kind of not. You need to like step back, and you need to kind of reassess some things, and you need to have balance in your life, and that's not something that I did a good job of. So I would probably tell my younger self, like, don't work as many hours. You are not your job. and you have your own personal likes, dislikes, interests, hobbies that are outside of your job, and you need to focus more on that and not to sacrifice your health for toxic relationships and for jobs. I've had to walk away from a lot of people that, with SPS, you get a literal body reaction when you're in a toxic situation, similar to maybe like a panic attack. Your body's kind of giving you all these alerts. So if I could try to have toned down the anxiety any which way, if I could have used some form of, I don't know, some sort of mental help for that. And I went to therapy and I did yoga and I did different things and I always worked out. So I was what I thought I was taking care of my mental health, but truly I really didn't have that balance, and I wish I did. And again, I think the younger generation, they want to sometimes call people lazy, or oh, they don't want to work as hard as we did, and I feel like, well, that's kind of right. It's kind of the way it should be. You need to have a life. You need to have a balance. And I know a lot of people talk about it, but a lot of people don't have it. And when you're in high stress and you put a lot of pressure on yourself, that's typically when a chronic illness is going to arise, because you're not prioritizing your mental health and the space that your brain and body needs to breathe. Again, I just go back to everything is a privilege. It's not. It's when you lose something, like the ability to walk, that you have no idea how much you took for granted in life. When I have a throat spasm, I can't talk, I can't drink fluids, I can't eat, and it could go on for 5 hours, and then you feel like you've been hit by a Mack truck. So I think that all your motor skills, all your cognitive skills, be so grateful every morning that you wake up when you have these things, because you can wake up one day and they can be completely gone, or impaired for quite a while. And it's a lot of adjusting and a lot of adapting and a lot of pain and isolation and grief. And I think every day that you wake up and you can successfully complete tasks, whatever they may be, that you cannot take that for granted. As cheesy as it sounds, every day is truly a gift. And it's taken me a while, because I've dealt with a lot of suicidal ideation. And for me to say that, coming up on my 6th year of diagnosis, means a lot, because I was in a very dark place for pretty much almost five and a half years. So it takes a while to accept something like this. So be grateful for what you have.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you for all the things that you just shared with us. I know how much honesty, how much grit it takes to actually admit it out loud, like all the things that you just said. And I truly believe that your voice matters to our listeners, to us, to all those who want to know more. Thank you so much. Your experience in this conversation has been such an eye opener, and we thank you for your time as well.
Yes, thank you so much again. And for our audience, this interview will be available on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, and our nonprofit website, which is currently under development. If you're listening and feel impacted by this conversation, please consider sharing this episode with a friend or on social media.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and all the other platforms to stay updated with the brain camaraderie and our work. Bye!